Welcome back. This is the third and final pedagogy that we're going to talk about, and it's called critical pedagogy. This idea was developed by Paulo Freire, who was a Brazilian scholar, and the idea behind critical pedagogy was to really promote social and environmental justice through education. He has this really great quote here of how he came to start thinking about critical pedagogy, and he said, "I didn't understand anything because of my hunger. I wasn't dumb. It wasn't lack of interest. My social condition didn't allow me to have an education. Experience showed me once again the relationship between social class and knowledge." So critical pedagogy really moved beyond some of these other beliefs and ideas to say that the content, how we're teaching it, the skills we're helping students develop is more important than anything else. So it doesn't get rid of these cognitivist ideas, but it adds a layer on top and says what we need to be teaching about, what we need to be supporting our students with is different. So I'm going to run through some basic concepts related to critical pedagogy pretty briefly, and then we'll talk about what that can look like in the classroom. So one of the main points is anti-colonial education. So education shouldn't just be an extension of the dominant power group. It's really empowering for students to develop their own culture if they're not part of the mainstream, particularly if they are from indigenous cultures or historically marginalized cultures. This education shouldn't only represent the culture and the beliefs of the teacher and of the mainstream educational arena. It really needs to include developing students' own cultures. It also highly values the importance of indigenous knowledge. And the belief is that when oppressed or marginalized people learn about their own culture, history, medicines, religion, heritage, practices, anything related to that, this can have a transformative effect on their lives, and this can really lead to empowerment. Indigenous knowledge is also important for everyone. There's much to be learned from indigenous people. So including information about students' cultures, including learning about their heritage and their culture, it's not just to help those students, it helps everybody, and it really helps to transform education. It's also important from a critical approach to understand that education is political. All education is political, and knowledge is political. And as teachers, we promote our own political views all the time, even if it's unconscious. So it's really important to explore what those views and values are and make them transparent and allow students the space to develop their own views and their own values, but also to understand that education, knowledge, and language are power, and they can be used to maintain the status quo and to keep marginalized people marginalized, or they can be used to try to balance that playing field. And the goal of critical pedagogy is, of course, to try to balance that playing field and provide that power to the students who historically have been disenfranchised from it. Another point is to strive for justice and equality in education. And of course, that's something that you all believe in, since you are all passionate about supporting your English learners. Of course, you believe in the justice and equality of their education. But that's not always the case, which is why it's one of the main points here. The next really important point is that the main goal of school should be to lessen human suffering. And this means to empower students with the tools they need to build the kind of lives that they want. It also really focuses on an end to what Freire called the banking system of education. And the banking system of education was the idea that the teacher is all-knowing and makes deposits of knowledge into the students who passively accept that knowledge. But we know that that's really not how learning works. And so a huge focus of his book, Pedagogy of the Oppressed, which was something he wrote in the late 1960s and really revolutionized the way that people think about education, was the idea that we really need to do something different than this traditional banking system of education. This also extended to the idea that good schools and good teachers don't blame students for their failures or strip them of the knowledge that they bring to the classroom. So teachers should know that students have life experiences and their own knowledge that is key in shaping their education and learning. And this should be used and respected and supported in the classroom, while also creating more of a dynamic, problem-solving, interactive environment rather than that teacher-led instruction where the teacher is all-knowing. This is directly connected to the next point with the idea that there needed to be a change in the student-teacher relationship, where the teacher really learns from the students and the learners are teaching each other and teaching the teacher. So students and teachers are learning together in this type of a pedagogy. Also, that teachers are researchers. He really believed that part of a teacher's role is to become a researcher, to learn about the students, learn about what works, and then also become an advocate, or what they call a warrior intellectual, to make sure that they're advocating for and supporting their students. But really that researcher role in learning about the students, learning about what practices are effective, and then studying how well they work. And that's something you've already started doing a little bit in SLT 102. Connected to this idea of teachers as researchers is the idea that we need a cycle of praxis, or a system of identifying and solving problems. So teachers should identify a problem, research the problem, develop a collective plan of action to address the problem, implement the collective plan of action, evaluate the action, assess its efficacy, and then re-examine the state of the problem. And this should be the natural state, which is repeated over and over throughout the cycle of teaching and learning. And the final point here is to really embrace counter-hegemony. Hegemony means the status quo or the norm or the accepted ways of doing things. So counter-hegemony really means challenging the status quo, not teaching the way you teach because it's the way it's always been done, or using content because it's the accepted content, but really looking at that critically and really challenging that and saying, is this the best way to do it? Is this the best content? Is there a better way that we could do it? Is there a way to make learning transformative rather than just giving deposits of knowledge? So the main point here is that critical pedagogy should be transformative teaching. We want to move away from just looking at how can we train our students to learn the right information to how can we transform lives. So even if your students don't comprise what you would describe as a traditionally oppressed or marginalized group, your transformative teaching should include teaching that has them engage in learning what their role is in the world, because critical pedagogy is for everybody. And it's really important that we think about moving away from this banking model, which many of you are already doing. And in this move away from the banking model, Freire advocated a model of education in which teachers pose problems that the students need to solve. And this problem solving and working through these ideas should also really include authentic materials that are connected to students' lives and students' realities so that it really is transformative, so that they're learning information that has meaning for them and meaning for their lives. In language teaching specifically, this means including a development of critical thinking, teaching the language of critical thinking, and reflecting themes of learners' reality. And that comes back to using these authentic materials, authentic scenarios and situations when you pose problems for learners to solve. So rather than giving information and having students give that information right back to you, giving them enough information so that they can grapple with a problem and come up with their own idea. So as I mentioned earlier, this really moves beyond methods. There's not one method that is going to do this, but critical pedagogy uses this as a framework and then pulls pieces from other effective approaches and models that we know connect well with this pedagogy. And some of those are constructivism. Constructivist approaches, which we'll talk about in a minute, really connect well with critical thinking and problem solving and authentic and relevant materials. INA-based or place-based learning also really connects with critical pedagogy in teaching students to feel empowered to learn more about their culture and their place and use that as a resource. Participatory ethnography is also a form of critical pedagogy, and that's something that you did in SLT 102 and are doing again this semester. The opportunities model is also a model for looking at how to teach language, and it connects very well with a critical pedagogy, and we'll talk more about that in the next unit. So a quick look at constructivism. This is when you have students take responsibility for constructing their own knowledge. So teachers set up complex, challenging learning environments to help students do this. And the teacher sets a lot of this up ahead of time and then is the facilitator as students go through and grapple with complex situations. And the teacher provides the appropriate language in order for students to negotiate meaning and work together. So there's really this shared responsibility for knowledge and learning. And shared responsibility is between the teacher and the students, and also between the students and each other. And constructivism really focuses more on problem solving. So you can see how this is connected to critical pedagogy in place of just strictly memorization. And because it's such an active collaborative learning approach, it often really helps sustain engagement with students, and that sustained engagement is really supported when constructivist tasks are relevant. We talked a little bit about social constructivism in SLT 102, and you can see the ideas that social interaction is really essential in the development of thought and language. And we learned about the zone of proximal development, where the idea is that children and students learn by watching and being supported by more proficient peers or adults. And this fits in very well in these constructivist environments. You can just add in more of the social support. And again, the zone of proximal development, developed by Vygotsky, is the distance between the level of what the student can achieve and their potential level of what they can achieve with support. And we know that they can achieve those higher levels with support, which we call scaffolding. So again, you can see in this graphic, like the affective filter, when the challenge level is too high, it will cause anxiety, and the learner won't be able to achieve even with help. And if the level is too low, the learner will be bored. The last type of critical pedagogy that I want to talk briefly about is INA-based learning. INA-based learning is also often called place-based learning, but we use INA-based in Hawaii. So INA-based or place-based education strives to make learning more relevant to students' lives. And INA-based or place-based learning really situates the learning in the place where the students are from or where they're living. So lessons are typically grounded in Native Hawaiian or local, whatever the local culture is, and values, and often incorporate indigenous ways of knowing and building connections with the local community. This can be really helpful for English language learners. Many of our students were born and raised here, but may not feel a close connection to the local community. Those students who were not born here and who have immigrated here may also not feel a close connection to the local community. And feeling connected and feeling like you belong is a huge piece of being an engaged student. So teaching through an INA-based lens and incorporating in local culture and values, as well as incorporating students' cultures and values from their own places, can really be engaging and motivating and meaningful for learners. So place-based education has been seen to be an effective approach for increasing student engagement, learning, and success. So take just a minute and reflect on what elements of critical pedagogy you do see or could see in your instruction, and what are some of the teaching implications of critical pedagogy. And just a reminder, this is the progression that the field of language teaching has gone through, and now hopefully we're at a place where a lot more critical pedagogy is being embraced and implemented.